Hello guys, David Vose here. Wow, what a beautiful day. It's man, I don't know. There's something really off with the weather. And it's not like you've heard before where people are like, "Oh, the weather's all messed up." This is different. It is still the 1st of March or 2nd of March, and it should be 10 degrees at night. It should be even down to 0 or up to maybe 15 degrees usually at night, but it's warm at night and it's warm during the day. It's like summer. There's something really wrong. But guys, I read we were talking about Prester John the other day and the migrations of individuals over here to America. And we were talking about Septimania and the Languedoc and where Mary Magdalene went down in Marseille, France. And they built 7 cities. Mary Magdalene and the Knights of St. John built these 7 cities. It was called the Languedoc. And then the Holy Roman Empire had some wars with them. When they kind of infiltrated with their bloodlines, they changed the name with their spelling to Septimania, which means the 7 cities. And before we even read this little paragraph I want to read to you, I don't want you to get bored. I don't want you to think this is going to be something you could just click off of and you don't need to see. Let me just show you a map. This is in 1597 of the location right where I'm at. And you can see on this map, and we'll show you this clearer and more in depth here in a little bit. And we'll show you pictures of the ancient cities and everything. If you look up to the top of the page, to the right, just to the left of where it says 1597, there is this, what appears to be like a lake. There are little castle-like figures that represent cities. There are 7 of those cities. And it's at the end of a long river, which we're going to show is the Gila River, which empties out here not far from where I live. Comes up into New Mexico, where Coronado came to find the 7 cities of gold. These are the 7 cities and this is the map that he used. And we'll explain why he used this map and why it was there. But this is what all the maps that during those days records. They don't say very much on these maps. They talk about California and the New Granada, which is something that we're going to show you what that means. But the river that they're showing you is not the Colorado. The Colorado is the other river there on the map called the Tototiac. Tontontiac. The Tontatiac is what they called the Colorado. But the Gila River goes to a lake in the Rocky Mountains, and you can see the words there, Septum and City Teum and Patrius. Patrius means the inheritance of the fathers, and the 7 septa and the cities, and they're underground cities. Now, let me read you this to give you a foundation of what we're going to talk about, which is historical proof, the history of these guys that came over and where they came from. They came from Septimania, and they renamed these 7 cities of gold, and they made 7 caves, and they hid the gold and the treasure from Mary Magdalene there in this spot. It's on all the maps from 1400 to 16 something. And on those same maps, and every one of them is Chilago, which we'll talk about too. And we'll show you pictures of these ancient cities. You can see where there were ancient cities back in 1500, 1400. One of them's called Granada, and one of them's called Suala, and different names that we'll show you here in a minute. But let's read this, and then we'll get back to these maps and these pictures. So, what if we had absolute historical evidence that these individuals took the wealth of those 7 cities, which was all the wealth of Mary Magdalene, Jesus Christ, and the Virgin Mother that owned Egypt, Persia, Media, Assyria, because they conquered the whole thing. Jesus was a prince. Mary Magdala was the priestess that ruled over the tower at Heliopolis in Egypt. We've talked about all of that. So I'm going to quickly read again to you these couple of paragraphs. And then that's all we're going to do with the reading. I want to talk to you guys about some things, and I'm going to show you some pictures. And it's going to blow your mind that we have actual proof. And I have now found, this is what's so exciting. I'm just so excited. 2 days ago, I did a video, or 3 days ago, where I showed you these ruins 2 miles, exactly 2 miles from my homestead, where I'm at. And we saw those ruins, and we haven't even gone back to look it over. We saw some pottery. That's about, I don't know, another 20 miles away from there is where the actual monument is to the ruins of, they call it Hawakua, or Hawaku, which is supposed to be the city that Coronado went to and thought it was one of the 7 cities of gold. That's the county I live in, Cibola, which means 7 pueblos, or the 7 pueblos or cities of gold. So they didn't find any 7 cities of gold, supposedly. Although we don't know if they might have found it and stole it and hid it somewhere. But the story goes they didn't find it. Well, I'm going to explain to you why today. Because it's not an above-ground city. These are 7 underground cities. They're caves. They're underground civilizations, just like the one Kincaid found in the Grand Canyon, which is something that we'll talk about in an upcoming video. But I now know, and I have a map where they drew exact location where the city was, where this cave is. I've been telling you guys it's around here somewhere, but I didn't know where. And I was really getting suspicious that it was right where the Lord gave me this land. And I've got Indian ruins on my land here. But it was only just in my head, and I felt it, but I didn't have any real evidence or proof that it was right here, that this was the actual spot, that there was, and it could be proven, there was people coming to this exact spot and would find the exact spot, and under some mountain there'd be a cave or an underground living quarters or a city underground where all this treasure would be. And I've got the evidence now. I've got the actual maps that they used to find the 7 cities of gold. But when they got there, they didn't know they were underground, and the hole in the ground was covered over by rocks. They didn't know where it was. But let me read just a couple of paragraphs, and then I'm going to show you some stuff that is just going to blow your mind. This is going to be a video you're going to want to watch, friends. But let me show you this. In the 1920s in Tucson, Arizona, which, remember, I'm on the New Mexico-Arizona border. So Tucson is not very far from me across the Arizona border. Just a few miles. And in 1920, in Tucson, Arizona, they were found these objects and writings in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, with both Catholic and Jewish ritual objects and symbols. Cyclone Covey describes this discovery in his book, Calais, a Roman Jewish colony in America from the time of Charlemagne, through Alfred the Great. Covey and other researchers are amazed at the mixture of Jewish, Christian, and Kabbalistic objects and symbols. However, this very much fits the period in the 8th century when in the Carolingian Empire there is a Jewish principality in southern France called Septimania, originally the Languedoc, but the 7 cities, ruled by Theodoric of Narbonne, or Macer Todros ben Judah, Magnario Ameri, or like maybe that's where they get America from. Born in 710, died in 765. Many members of this family, descended from the exarchs of Babylon, embraced a Jewish form of Catholicism, while other members remained outwardly Orthodox Jews. Calais artifacts from Tucson. The Calais record speaks of a Theodorus, which is some historical person that actually lived, that was the king of these lineal descendants of Mary Magdalene, but was also infiltrated from another Jew from that Charlemagne found from Baghdad and brought him over from the line of Jeconiah. So it's partly of the line of Jesus and partly mixed with another line of the Jews from that time when Charlemagne brought that lineage over. And this Theodorus was then the leader of many peoples who leave the Roman lands for Calais, which we find is North America, in 775 AD. Covey and others believe that Theodorus is a Jewish leader in the city of Rome. However, this is too literal reading of the term Rome. Theodorus is none other than the Jewish king of Septimania, the 7 cities, a Roman Jewish state in southern France, where Mary Magdalene was, in the Languedoc in Septimania. That's what they renamed it to. He is the son of the first Jewish king of Septimania, also called Theodoric. Is also known as Theodoric, king of Saxony, and as Namus, duke of Bavaria. That's where the mixing came in. These Bavarians and these Viking kind of individuals infiltrated the line of St. John and Mary Magdalene, and they then, having conquered that, were also dukes of Bavaria up there in Germany. So these are the Bavarians mixing with Jesus and Mary Magdalene's line. He and his brothers were great warriors, Davidic princes of the time of Charlemagne. Professor Arthur Zuckerman, in his book A Jewish Princedom in Feudal France, confuses him with his father, who bears the same Frankish names of Theodoric and Amory. On the death of his father, Macer Theodoric, in about 765 AD, Nehemiah Theodoric becomes the Western Exarch and leader of all the Jews of the revived Western Roman Empire of Charlemagne. In 775 AD, Nehemiah Theodoric reconquered the American Empire of Callalus. Callalus was ruled by the Silvanus Toltexus, or the Toltecs, which we're going to find over a series of videos that we're going to be doing. The Toltecs and the Mexicas, or the Mexican people, from the Aztecs and from the Nahuatl Indians, they were already there. That's the Nephites that you read in the Book of Mormon. But this other group came over in 775, a Roman colony, which was infiltrating the French colony of Mary Magdalene. And they came here and founded this thing where they called it Callus, but it was America. In the 1st century BC, by the Babylonian exarch known as the Silvanus Ogam, or the Silvanus Barbo, Anasi of Mara, ruler of Somerset in Britain, a great Roman Jewish ruler, soldier, and ancestor of the Swan Knights, which we'll find is the King Arthur and Percival, the great prince. So he also had a fleet of trading vessels known as the ships of Solomon, or the swan boats. The ships are shaped like a swan, with its sails like the wings of a beautiful gliding white swan. After the defeat of the Silvanus Toltecs, the members of the royal family were sent back to Europe, where they were under the protection of Nehemiah Theodorus and his family. The legends of Dune and Ogier are based on the activities of his family descended from Duon, Antigone, and Silvanus Barbo. The legends of Ogier and Dane, or Dune, probably the Tuatha De Danans, or Dan, and Dune de Mayans actually refer to the Tuatha De Danann, or Dunan, who are also known as the Manian, or the Maine of America, where the giant ogre heads of the Olmecs are found. The Irish legends of Regamon also allude to this family. The Jews of this ancient Roman Jewish kingdom of Rhoda were also known as the Rodans, or the Radanites, and were great Jewish merchants who controlled the ancient trade routes. The Rhone Valley and the river were named after these Jewish Radanite merchants who used the Rhone Valley as the base for their trading empire. Well, originally it was owned by Peter Waldo, Pierre Valdez, the guy in the story of the Arthurian legend, Percival, or Pierre Valdez. Percival was the great prince in the story, in the legend. And they owned, in history we find that Peter Waldo owned 169 cities, towns, and villages up the Rhone. So this is the Rhone Valley, and that's why they were called Waldensians, or the Valley people. Waldo means valley. And this is the Rhone Valley. We talked about that the other day. So many of them settled in Ireland, and then in the 1st century AD, uniting with their cousins descended from Joseph of Arimathea. And these all got together and began to find out that they were all brothers, and they collaborated. So in the 5th century, Callalus, which is America, North America, was part of the revived Western Empire of King Arthur, a descendant of the Swan Knights. By the 8th century, due to the admixture with the American Indians, the state had reverted to paganism. This is his view. Nehemiah Theodorus led an expedition in 775 to return Calalis to Jewish and Roman rule. He conquered the ancient city of Rhoda, and the Jewish law was restored. After 4 years in 779 AD, Nehemiah Theodorus left Calalis for his kingdom in France, which he had left in the hands of his brother Guillaume de Gallon, killed in the Battle of Carcassonne. He then appointed a British Davidic prince, Jacob, as the Jewish king of Calalis, as regent for his young son Israel, who was married to Jacob's daughter. Jacob was the descendant of King Arthur, as well as the Jewish royal family of Bernicia. Jacob was the leader of the British Jewish settlers in Calalis, or North America. The Roman Jewish settlers of Calalis in the 8th century were made up of the two main groups, the Latin Jewish group from the Frankish Empire, which is the Septimania, and the British Jewish group from the British Isles. So it goes on to talk about Joseph of Arimathea and these giants that were here, and they defeated all of this, and the Toltecs and the heads and all that. And then Joseph's grandson Nathan had traveled to America with his kinsman Nathaniel Bar Tolmai, or Saint Bartholomew. Nathaniel was a grandson of Sylvanus Ogham, the Jewish ruler of Calalis. Solomon II ben Nathan Zisustra was succeeded by Babylonian Ixlark by his son Nathan II Uqba. And this just goes on and on and on. And it's hard to follow. The point we're trying to make here is in 779, this Jewish group, ruler of the Septimania, became the Jewish ruler of the German lands of Bavaria and Saxony, as well as their conquering the Languedoc and Septimania. And the people who were there, we don't know whether it was true knights of St. John that when they were being attacked took the treasure and left, but they came to America and they found these treasures in this area. And we know this is where all the maps led. They were trying to, the Vikings, these northern Germanic tribes that were infiltrating the Septimania, 7 cities where Mary Magdalene left her gold. They couldn't find it there, and they fled to America and deposited it in the 7 Septimania area here where I'm at. They deposited it somewhere in the ground. And these Vikings that were infiltrating came here to this spot. Old Coronada led an expedition to find this, and they had maps. They knew where they went. They followed them on boats. That's why they made these maps. And on these ancient maps, one of the only places we have on here is the Grand Canyon River of the Colorado and the Gila River that goes up to the Gila cliff dwellings and the ancient ruins there in the Zuni tribe today, which is the 7 cities of gold, the county of Cibola where I live. But I don't want to just keep reading. I want to show you literally the ancient map where whoever these guys were came, coming from Septimania, the 7 cities, and depositing this great patria, or this inheritance from their fathers, in a place called Septim, and the cities underground in 7 caves here where I live. Let me show you. So here is the Universi Orbis Descripto ad usum navigantium. And this is the ancient map that shows America. Now, it doesn't look exactly like the America we have today, but remember, on our map, it's distorted. You can go and look that up because it's on a globe, and they have been telling us for a long time that many of the countries that look much bigger in the northern hemisphere, because they're wrapped, they're actually smaller. So it's a weird oblong look when you find out the reality of the actual continents. So this is actually probably more accurate than the maps we have today, where they blatantly show you pictures. For instance, Africa is much bigger than it actually looks on our map, because near the equator, things get smaller. And this is why Russia and Greenland, Alaska, and Canada look so big. So this is distorted. But anyway, if you look here, you see Shalaga on this map. And just to give you an idea, this is what that city looked like. And we've gone through some of this before, but these pictures are real. You can look these up on the internet and they're floating around. They're real pictures. The way that they get around all this is these idiots are telling us that this was all made out of paper mache for the fair, the World Fair, and they burned it all down. They did indeed burn it all down after the fair. Many cities across America, from California to New York, many, many cities, even around the world, apparently trying to get rid of some old world history that they didn't want us to know about. These are magnificent cities, and we can tell that the Shalago appears to be some kind of a capital because of various things. The statue that has the Tartarian Liberty Cap, we know that it's Tartarian, which we've proven is Mary Magdalene and Jesus and Presbyter John and stuff. But that is a capital because it's got the temple. It's got the baptismal font and the Ben, the capital, like all the other capitals, and the obelisk, which all capitals, you notice Washington, D.C. has the obelisk. They call it the Washington Monument, the male phallic symbol. This is the temple. There's the baptismal font, and then on the other end is the temple dome, which is the woman's vulva, and they call it the Ben. And this goes back to Egypt and Athens, and every capital since then, the Vatican, London, all of them have always had these temples in their center. This is a great capital. So there may have been several capitals. We don't understand. We don't know. This has been lost to us, but Shalago was definitively the New Frankio Kingdom, which is France, which is where Mary Magdalene came and set up. So there was a vast civilization here. I can show you pictures of San Francisco and St. Louis and other cities and Boston and so forth. It was huge, magnificent metropolises that we have no explanation for other than that there has been a lot of stuff that's been erased from our mind and history. And this is where they got the idea of the Statue of Liberty and so forth. But they started over again, did a reset, and burned it all down. But what's really interesting is Shalaga. You can see the Great Lakes, but it's more of a big, windy river. It doesn't look exactly like the Great Lakes we have, but it's similar. And Shalago is not actually on the Great Lakes where we have it today. But that is Nova Francia, or the new French territory that really owned all of most of America, or where we got it from the Louisiana Purchase. But Shalaga is, who knows, but it's kind of near these mountains, which may be some part of the Rocky Mountains. But then they've got Florida, not actually down there in that little part we call Florida, on that peninsula, but the word Florida is up kind of in the Appalachians. So you would have to assume those are kind of like Appalachian mountains or something. But there are lots of words we could look into. There's a word right there in the center. If you look where all those lines are going, they make a center here in a place called Marta or Merata. And by the way, these are Spanish people coming from either France or Spain. And today in Italy, they have a place called Marata, and it refers to Martha or Mary, the companions of Jesus. There's another place called Marata in Brazil because the Portuguese left Spain and went to Brazil and brought with them the name Martha. What do you know? So this is a word that obviously is the word Martha. Now, who are these people that were making these maps with the 7 cities of Cibola gold, and right there in the center of it, the greatest city they call Marta. Well, that's just an obvious proof for what we're saying here today. Now, this is crazy, and this is going to go a long way to explain what I'm trying to tell you here today. So we have this on this ancient map, and it's on all the maps, all these old maps that were used by somebody. We're going to prove then that they were used by Coronado to try and find the 7 cities of gold. And these were maps that were made by people who brought the gold there in the first place. So what is Marata? On ancient maps, particularly those depicting the American Southwest, Marata usually refers to a Native American Pueblo village, most likely located near the present-day area of the Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico. That's it. That's the city of gold. Right? That's it. Often mentioned alongside other Pueblo names like Cibola, which is the county that I live in, Cibola County, and Acas in early Spanish exploration accounts. Early maps, plural, all these maps, often position Marata southeast of the Zuni Pueblo, indicating a nearby Pueblo community. Spanish explorers like Coronado would have encountered these Pueblo villages during their expeditions in the 16th century. While the exact location of Marata is debated among historians, the name is generally associated with the Pueblo village in Zuni region. So here's the thing. They got all these maps, and there's very little on the map. But everything that's on the maps have to do with this Marata, the Zuni Pueblo Indians, the 7 cities of gold, Septimania, and the 7 cities of gold, and this Gila River that goes right up through, across Arizona into New Mexico, and where I live up here by the Zunis. So the whole reason for all of these maps, that we have all these early maps, is because they were exploring the area in those days, in 1500. And they were coming to a place that they thought was there, Chalaga and Marata, the Zuni village, Pueblo, Cibola, 7 cities of gold. Now, going back to that map, look just to the left of Martha. There is a river that goes from the Gulf of California. You can see the Gulf of California there, just below Marta. And right at the top, where it meets California, the Gulf of California there, you see a river that goes all the way up almost to the mountains just before you get to Chilago. So they go a long ways. We'll find that river is the Gila River, which goes and ends where I live here in New Mexico. That is not that river that goes from the Gulf of California, just skirting above Marata and Calicuas, and ends in some kind of mountain range before you get to Chilago. That is not the Colorado River. And we can show you that here, because we do know from records that the Totontiac was what they called the Colorado River. And that's up further. That starts also at the California Gulf, at the very top of it. And this particular map doesn't seem to show everything in exact reality. All the other maps I'm going to show you do seem to have the reality built into it. But it seems like the Colorado River is kind of too far above the California Gulf. But let me show you a different map, and we'll show you what's really going on here. Here is a better version of that map. Description div tol di mondo second. And you hone into this area. You can better see now the Gulf of California. And right at the Gulf of California, it takes off to the right. That is the Gila River. And it goes all the way to a mountain range, and then beyond that is Chilaga, and then there's the Great Lakes. Now, there's absolutely no question that is the Gila River. We'll prove that in this video. However, the Gila River today doesn't go all the way almost to Chilago or across the plains or over the mountains or whatever. There's something. It doesn't even look like in that picture. It just looked like a vast river that's almost a lake. So the geography has changed over the last 500 years. We know that there was a Lake Bonneville that was much bigger. Now it's smaller, it's a little Salt Lake, A lot of things have actually changed. There could have been natural dam on that river that made it much bigger, but it seemed to have gone further east than it does today. But if you look at where it shows Marta, I believe that is where the river ends today. So in our day, the river ends there at Marta, which is the Zuni Pueblo reservation that we have down here. But Mexico was called Mexico, and there was the Nova Franca and the Calicuas. So this says Siva India Nova, Ameria, Annum Regnum. I don't know if that's supposed to be New Guinea. Not sure where Hawaii is in all of this, but anyway. Now, here is another map. It's called, I guess it's called the Universe Orbis Descripto ad Usum Navigantium. That's what it says on the top of the map. And so the lighter colors are the continents. You zoom in here, and there again, it's really the same map. You see Chilago, Nova Franca. But let's go on. We go down here. We go down here to this map called the Granada Nova et California. That's in 1597. Pretty old. And so we go down here, and this gives us a close-up of the Gulf of California and this particular river going off to the east that we were talking about. So here's the California. And if you notice, all these rivers along the Gulf, you see about 1, 2, 3, or 4 of them. Those are all very accurate to this day. You've got the River Maya, and I don't remember the names of these rivers, but they're all down there. They all go from the mountains of Mexico down into the Gulf. But all the way up at the northern part of the Gulf of California, and you see California written there. And it's a strange thing that they do on these ancient maps. They'll have Cali and then a long space in Fornia. And they'll do that with words that we don't have a separation in the middle. I don't know. But notice again, there's this Totontiac. The Totontiac is the Colorado. It goes straight up from the northern part of the Gulf of California. And it goes into a place called Chuco. I note the fact that somewhere up there in northern New Mexico is a place, mid-northern New Mexico, about 120 miles from me, is a place called Chaco Canyon. But I don't know if that has anything to do with that. But notice that there are cities along the Colorado here. And it appears that the reason that they called that river the Totontiac is because there might have been a big city there. Right a little bit north from the Gulf of California, the Mar Vermillo is what I guess they called it. But there's another river that goes this way. And notice that it's not named. Okay, it's not named, but there is a city along the way or two. One called Cibola, Maybe it's Cibola, I don't know. But it starts, if you notice, at what looks like Miraflores, or B.DE Miraflores. That is on the map today. Miraflores, it's actually Mexicali, right at that area at the northern end of the California Gulf. Mexicali, that's where the river starts. That's why we know it's the Gila River and goes in that direction. The only river that starts there and goes that far in that direction. The Miraflores. And I would assume that Mira is Mary and Flores is flowers. So she's a beautiful woman. But it is called the Granada. Granada. And this was the name originally of this whole area. The New Granada, because Granada was originally the capital of southern Spain, the province down there in southern Spain where they left on their boats. And then they came here and made a new Granada and a new Hispania, and a new Francia. But this was the new Granada from Spain. So Mexicali is where this river begins and goes east and goes to a certain place where there is a lake and there are 7 cities. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the words there are septum, cietatum, and patria. Now, that's old Spanish language, not modern Spanish. It's quite a bit different. But septum means 7. And cietatum has something to do with city. Cietatum, like a kingdom of cities or something like that. So 7 cities. But the word patria is interesting because it doesn't just mean, papa or patriarch, but it's patria, which means patrimony or their inheritance. It's a place that is on the maps where they came fleeing from the lower area down in southern Mexico and Peru and wherever they came. And they brought with them some treasure, some inheritance. And this might have a lot to do with these 7 caves that the Aztecs or the Mexican people, they were called Mexica people. Nowadays we call them Aztecs, but a lot of people are saying now they probably were never really called Aztecs. But the Aztec word was used, but that's not really what they were called. They were called Mexica people or Nuhatl people or the Nuha people, whereas the Book of Mormon calls them the Nepha people, and they were the Nephats or the Nuha or the Nuhatl people. L silent. Or from that old Spanish language, they ended up pronouncing it Nava or Navajo. And they got over here, came from on a boat and landed somewhere in Peru and made a big civilization in Mexico and Mexico City. And they called it the land of Enoch or Enochtitlan. And they had 7 tribes eventually. They started off with 4 tribes. And eventually all these 7 tribes of the Aztec Mexica people. Mexica was one of the tribes of the Aztec people, or the people of the Azatlan, or the Atlas land, the land of Atlantis. And they were driven out and they went underground somewhere. And they began to live in cities underground. And it says they lived underground in cities for 200 or 300 years. The reason they were doing that was somebody was trying to wipe them out. There was a big war. The Book of Mormon says there was a war between the Lamanites and the Nephites until all the Nephites ended up being completely destroyed. But we're not really sure about all this history. But we do know the one thing, that it had a lot to do with these 7 cities. And the fact that septum is the word that we find. Remember, I keep telling you about the Languedoc, where Mary Magdalene went in southern France. Marseille, France, became the Languedoc, and they built 7 cities. And that was the inheritance of the lineage of Mary Magdalene, Jesus Christ, and the Virgin Mother, who were very wealthy people because they were kings and queens. Mary Magdalene was the princess of the Tower of Heliopolis in Egypt and owned all the wealth of the Egyptians and the Persians and the Medians and the Assyrians because she had a war with them all and had all this treasure. And when they left on a boat to Marseille, France, which, by the way, Marseille is another way of saying Mary again, because that's where Mary went, and they revere her in that area. There are shrines to her. She lived in a cave for, I think, 30 years and would preach to the people, was called the apostle to the apostles, and was the Gnostic apostle, as they also called her. Then the Holy Roman Empire had a war with them and drove them out, and this is part of the Waldensian Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition. And these original Spanish, Waldensian, French people were infiltrated, and after they drove them out, they called it Septimania, or Septim. And they were the 7 cities of Septim. And so here they are. And I'm going to show you with another map exactly, well, with this one we can show you. It's a big river. We will show you that the Gila River begins at this Miraflores or Mexicali and goes east and crosses a certain mountain range, which you can see here would be the Rocky Mountains, where there's this big lake and the 7 cities. Now, that's what you might gain from that very crude map. But let's take a look at something else. All right, here is the America Siva Novi Orbis Nova Descripto. One of these ancient maps that are in the 14th, 15th, 16th century. And this one has the whole globe. It's pretty interesting. And it's a little bit more accurate. We can see South America very clearly. And there is the Gulf of California that we were looking at. And notice that the river that we were looking at, now that we get a better picture or shape that's more accurate of the United States, we see that this river, Gila River, doesn't go all the way over to Chilago, actually. But there is Chilaga. It's there. But it definitely stops way before it gets over there to the Great Lakes. It stops in the Rocky Mountains somewhere. And there's that Marata that we were looking at. Hispania Nova, or New Spain. So we can definitely see from this more accurate shape of America that where that river Gila starts there at the northern part of the Gulf of California and goes kind of east, it ends in these Rocky Mountains. Okay? It ends there and does not go across the plains over to Chilaga or the Great Lakes region. There's a long distance between it. But it goes quite a ways. It looks like it goes through Arizona and on into New Mexico at least, and ends in the Rocky Mountains. As apparently, from this weird, crude description, you see it looks like right at the Continental Divide, or where the Rocky Mountains have their highest peaks, which is where I'm at in New Mexico on the Continental Divide. But that is not the Colorado, because the Colorado was called the Totontiac. And that Colorado goes up to the Rocky Mountains as well. And you can see some writing that we can't read it because it's too blurred. Doesn't come in very well. So some of these maps show things more disproportionate. This map's getting more proportionate. Somebody having to do with a beautiful Maria lands in a boat, and they evidently walk up this river, Gila River, and make a civilization in the mountains where they deposit in 7 caves or 7 cities. This is why they didn't ever find the cities, because they weren't above ground. They were cities beneath the ground. And they made them underground to hide all of their information. They lived down there for 200 or 300 years. So this Aztec Mexican Nuhatl Indians, the Pueblo Indians that are in that region, it says there were 7 tribes. The 7 tribes of the Aztec included the Aztec Mexica, the Chalca, the Tlaxcalteca, the Acolhua, Oxachimilca, Tepanica, and the Tiahuyaca. Hard to pronounce those words. Some of those letters are silent, so I don't even know which ones. But part of the Azatlan origin, which is the Atlas land, you can look that up. That's actually what that means. Just like Tenochtitlan, the T is silent. It's Enoch's land. So part of the Atlantis, the original Atlantis, the Azatlan origin story, says that all 7 tribes emerged from Chicomozotoc, or the place of the 7 caves. The place of the 7 caves. You see, they weren't cities, they were caves. They were underground civilizations. And there's a whole mythology. See here, Chicomozotoc history and mythology. See here, it says, a mysterious place called Chicomozotoc, home of the Aztecs, discovers origins in the mythology. Learn about its ancient inhabitants called Nahua. See, it's spelled Nuhatl, but it's pronounced Nuha, which is the same as the Book of Mormon Nephi, or the Nephites, from Nephi. And then it says the Azatlan was believed to be an ancestral homeland to the Aztecs. Its exact location still unknown. Chicomozotoc, the place of the 7 caves, was a separate concept, and the Nuha people believed was the place of their creation. The 7 tribes of the Aztec included these that we just mentioned, and it says that part of their origin story is that there are the 7 tribes emerging from these 7 caves. But if you read their legend, the gist of it is that they went underground for 200 or 300 years. And this was like long after the Nephites were already wiped out. But evidently there was wars going on. Now this time probably from the Vikings, as we'll show. And they went underground into these 7 caves during this time and lived underground. So they didn't get murdered and massacred by these crazy Vikings that were trying to massacre them. Which might have been the giants that the natives talk about. And then when they came out of there, they were like reborn. It was part of their mythology and their history. And so while there was wars going on, people being massacred, and they preserved all their records in golden and copper plates and treasures. And we'll tell you about those treasures. But wherever the treasures are, they're in the 7 cities or 7 caves that are around a lake. Now, we'll show you on this, there is no lake. At that time, maybe in ancient times, there was more water. We know that Lake Bonneville was bigger, but this river was longer than the Colorado, perhaps. And then later on, we have a map where it ends in what appears to be a lake, and around that lake is the 7 cities. I'll show you that here. Now I want to show you this one, Carta Marina Nueva Tavola. Now you see, we've got a very strange situation there. That doesn't look anything like the United States anymore in Canada. You can see Florida here, and you can see Mexico and South America and so forth, Panama. But you see Mexico, and there's the Gulf of California. But there's no rivers or anything there, and there's this crazy big, probably Lake Bonneville or something that goes all the way to the ocean. Now, some people will think, well, maybe this is just some misinformation, or it was somebody made a map that's not accurate. Well, it may have been very accurate at the time that the map was made. Remember, some of these maps, they don't know when they were originally made. They're copies. But these are maps that they used in ancient times, maybe even 2,000 years ago or more, and came to America looking, well, some of the maps were made because there were individuals that came over here and hid treasures, and the treasures are on the map. You can see the names and the peoples and where they came from just by looking at the name places. And at that time, maybe 1,000 years ago, that's what the United States may have looked like. We see lots of maps where the Great Lakes don't look like the Great Lakes today, or the Mississippi ends up being a big gorge or cuts the United States in half. There were different times where the water was higher or lower. Now here's another one. Now here's another one called the Granada Nova at California. So that means the new Granada, which, like I said, Granada was something far south originally, where these people migrated from at some point. And there's the California coast and the Gulf of California. And again, we can zoom into this and clearly see it starts from Mexicali, or Maria Flores, the flowers, the beautiful flowers of Mary. And there's a city called Granada, as well as Ciola, that seem to be pretty large cities. But you go up this Gila River and you end up in this lake. Now the river ends at a lake, and they talk about it in their legends, this lake. And there are these 7 cities. You see them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right in the middle of the mountains. And it's the inheritance, the patriarchal inheritance of the 7 caves or cities that were underground. They were never found because they're underground, and they're all along the Gila River. Now, I've told you that where I live, the Zuni Reservation here, they claim one of the 7 cities of gold was there, and Coronado went and looked at it, and there was no gold, and he left mad. Well, because they didn't show him the city. It was underground. And maybe the native peoples that were there at that time didn't even know the city was underground. There's just about 30 miles from me, 20 some miles, is a monument to Cibola. This word means this gold, the city of gold. And my county I live in is Cibola County, which is right where this map shows there were these 7 cities. This is the map that Coronado used to find the 7 cities of gold, but couldn't find them. Their legend says they spent 300 years down there and hid all of their patriarchal treasures from a place called the Septimania, or the 7 cities of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. I think this Suola might be Cibola. But you notice all these names, Anna, Maria, right? Different names that you can recognize, Pedro and stuff like this. Colorado is the Totontiac, Flu, or the Flow. And there's the Concha, or Cucho. You guys might remember I said that there's a place called Concho that's about, I don't know, probably 80 miles from here or something. And there's a lot of people that live out there, and they're campers out throughout the hills in that area. But it's a big area called Concho. I think that word probably comes from that. But that's not necessarily the same spot on the map. Here's another map, an ancient map, dated 1598. It's called the Nueva Hispania Tabula Nova. And so we'll zone into there. And there again, there is the Mar Verme, which is the California Calmibaphoria. It's not even spelled the same. But there's that river. And now now that river's not very, very long. It just goes over to a place called Checho, maybe Chaco Canyon, or Cibola down here. But it's just a smaller river, and the Totontiac is much longer. So this is in 1598. The Colorado is way longer and goes further north. But the Gila just goes a little ways over here into the Rocky Mountains. And oh, there's Marta. It's like the whole area was called Marta, after Mary and Martha. Let me go down here. Now remember, look, there's all kinds of these maps. It's just, I don't know how many of these maps, and I haven't showed you all of them because they don't all show the area we're looking at. But there's lots of these maps, and I'm going down through these old maps, and we get down to, there's one of the pole, a view from the North Pole. There's another one from the pole. But here's America Sive Novi Orbis Nova Descripto. So there's a map that shows the Gulf of California. And again, at this time, the Tontiac, or the Colorado River, there is a place called Chucho, or Chaco. But here we have Cibola, and this is now called the Rio Hermoso. And that's quite a big city there, the Ciola. But it goes all the way up Tigris Rio, the Tigris Rio. And it goes all the way up to the Suala Mons. And there's that Marata again. So it's quite a bit longer than it's about the same that they keep showing it. It's quite a bit longer than the Colorado. But still ends in the Rocky Mountains, somewhere in the middle. And Chila goes way across. Then you see the Missouri, and I don't know, I guess that's, seems like the Tennessee River used to be bigger than the Mississippi sometimes on these maps. I don't know where the Mississippi is, but there's lots of these huge rivers that go up through the Gulf of Mexico. And these rivers that are going into the Gulf of California are there to this day. I think those are the correct names in some of these. So this doesn't tell us a lot about what's going on over there in the California Gulf and the Gila River or the Colorado. But notice what it does show over here in New England. It still says Nova Francia. So the French at this point were there. Now let's see what year this was. 1600. Probably a copy of an older map. But it does say 1600, 1601. First published. Finally engraved example of this scarce map of the world of Mercator's projection. You heard of the Mercator maps. Engraved by Ambrose and Ferdinand Arsenis from an early edition of Ortelius Epitome, published by Michael Coignet, first published in 1601. The map names California, Quivira, and Estotaland. We're going to find out who they are that was colonizing America in 1600. Before the Constitution, a people called Estotaland, along with the Nova Francia, or the French, they were there, and the Nova Hispania, or the New Spain. But along with those two, the French and the Spanish, we've got this Estotaland. So I looked it up. This is the way it's written on the map. Eftotiland. And it's also spelled Estotiland instead of Eftotiland. The world of Eftotiland, or Labrador, settled by the Eftoti, or the Estoti, was a partly forested and grassland world where the Asgard guided the local human Midgardian alongside the local colony of Nox. Because of that, the world was known to be well defended by the so-called wooden statues, golem-like beings, or so they thought. When the Goa'uld Sijatar, the Eaters, and the Ogress, a more massive giant, Unis, or later Unatar and Taruna, associated with disease, snakes, lizards, and wolves. A Goa'uld, or a Goa'uld, queen famous for her serpent guard, and Lupus guard Jaffa, modeled after the Intula snake. Humanoid and Lupus wolf humanoid species. Oh, I'm going to believe this right up, hook, line, and sinker. She had used, besides Unis, before human Tar from Tari came around, known as the Wicked Mother, sorceress of magic songs and spells, as well as sharp frost sorcerers, wizards, jealous persons, and other creatures like herself. Whom she allied with was related to or had birthed herself in terms of the Goa'uld, or the Goa'uld, and Pimta inside of them. A giant monster, Syojatar, and Eaterus, someone who eats, therefore was a danger to the Eftotiland, and needed to be stopped. But her Jaffa were rather brutish, but also very strong, much like their goddess herself, who far surpassed them all. The local Eftotiland citizens and warriors, partly Norse, Thule, and Vikings, partly North Canadian Indians from Labrador, therefore were quite overwhelmed from the giantess by themselves, which was why they asked the newly arriving explorers and adventurers from the Russian Siberian Stargate Command for help. But the Russians, too, only had a single team on the world, which was why they came up with the plan to focus on Syjarta herself, hoping her forces would be shocked and devastated seeing them kill their goddess in battle. Still, despite this, doing so would be no easy task, as she was no simple giantess, but some of her HOTS features reminded the RSS team of the Taruna, meaning she could probably be a human Tar-Unis hybrid. And this often meant she also inherited more strength. What are we reading here? What in the fliddly-diddly-widdly are we reading here? Well, it sounds like a novel, chapter 20. It's literature, but I'm not quite sure what it is. It doesn't even say. So let's go back. One thing we find out, though, so far, is that these Estotiland are Vikings. Now, remember, this is about the time that the Nephites went down underground in 7 cities and were hiding the memorabilia and the inheritance and the treasures of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene somewhere in New Mexico at the end of a long river that we will show you definitively is the Gila River that goes to the Gila cliff dwellings and the Zuni Reservation 20 miles from me, where the Cibola City of Gold and the 7 cities were supposed to have been, that they never found but were underground. So it was these Vikings that do what they always do. They arrived on the coast of America, probably in the 16th century, and they started murdering people. And they were considered monsters and dragons and ghouls and all kinds of crazy things. Canada or New France. So here's this. I click on it, and it's a map. We'll open it up. There's New France. I guess near Nova Scotia and up there in Canada. And look at the names. There's a New York. New France, and then we have New England below the river there. And below the river is New England, and that's where New York is. People from the old York. And below that's Virginia and Carolina. But it's called Maryland, right? Virginia and Carolina, because remember, that's where we heard the other day we saw that information where Prester John arrived in Virginia or North Carolina somewhere, or South Carolina, I'm not quite sure, but in the Carolinas. And that's where they called it Maryland, because it was the land of Mary, that they brought Mary over on the boat with them, or at least the information and the history of Mary, whether she had lived 1,000 years and was still alive, or whether it was just some sort of priesthood after the order of Mary, because some of these Prester Johns could have been certain knights that were initiated, and they laid their hands upon them and knighted them, and they continued to carry on the name of Prester John. And that's why for thousands of years we still got a Prester John setting up his kingdom in some far-off land. But they always bring with them Mary, and this is why we call it Maryland. But above that was the New Francia. But then you notice it says a New Britannia too, New Britannia. But there is Labrador, the Corterelius, the Cardinal's Head, C. Farwell, Belford. There's Elizabeth. There's the Bermuda Triangle. They still had that in those days. What year is this? London publication place date, 1679. Eftotiland or Terra de Labrador, Elias, New Brittany. Breton. So is it from Breton, which were descendants of Mary Magdalene, that were run out of France and ended up in Breton? So I don't know, but there's a lot that we just don't know. Notice it's Acadia, the Port Royal, and New Swedenland. So there's definitely some Swedens there, or some Swedish. So back to this map. Let me show you what that looks like today. And remember, that river that is not marked Gila, but today we call it the Gila or the Gila River. And we know it's that river because it's the only one that goes all that distance and starts there at Mexicali. Let me show you where to this day the word Miraflores is still there. All right, here's the Baja California. This is where the Gulf goes up. And notice that right here, there's Yuma, this is Mexicali. There is Miraflores. It's basically Mexicali. And well, let's look at it from Google Earth, because it doesn't show the river very well it's better here. So this is Yuma, Mexicali. Right there, Mexicali. Now you can see the river, Gila River. So there's the Gila River, and it would be too difficult for me to show you where this river goes. But let me just get a picture of it here. All right, I finally found a map that it's hard to even find anything that shows it very clearly. But if you notice that there is the Gulf of California, and going kind of straight up and then over to the right, you see the Colorado. But the one that goes to the east, right from the Mexicali area, right from where the map that we looked at showed that river going east, starts from this Maria Flores, which we've identified as Mexicali. And that's Mexicali. That's the exact river. It's the Gila River. And it goes all the way over across Arizona and all the way into New Mexico. And where does it end? in New Mexico, that's where I live. Look at where that is. That is in the middle, slightly below the middle of the western line there of New Mexico. There's New Mexico. And I'm in the western part of New Mexico, right there, just beyond where that river ends. Now, this was, the picture we saw was, hundreds of years ago, but right now that's where the river ends, in a place called Gila Cliff Dwellings, which is ancient ruins of these Pueblo, Nuha, Nephite Indians. So here is, you see the line right there? That's the New Mexico-Arizona line. And so that river, there's Gila, and there's the Gila River, and it goes up here and wanders around. There's the Gila River. Where does it go from here? Up here. Patience, patience. It's going to take a while to get to the end of this so we can see exactly where it ends. There's the Gila Hot Springs right there. And this is kind of where it ends. It forks into western Gila and eastern Gila. It's the East Fork and the West Fork. So there's the Gila Mesa Road where the ruins are. And there is a small pond or whatever. But so we'll just say right about where this Gila Hot Springs is, because that shows up on the map as we zoom out. Well, we can actually see where the river ends. It's right there at the Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument. So we'll mark the Gila Cliff Dwellings with a red dot or whatever that is, and we'll zoom out. And so there's where I live, a little bit north of there, but in the same general area. Over here is the Zuni Reservation, which I'm practically living on, and the Navajo Indian Reservation on the right side, and the Zuni on the left. And there's Apache and Hopi and everything else all around me. But right here on this road, 36, right up in this area, I'm not sure exactly where it is. Let me see if I can get that. There's the old Cibola Seven Cities of Gold Monument. All right, this is it's permanently closed, but this is the monument. It's called Hawiku, and it's supposed to be where Montezuma went to find one of the seven cities of gold, and it's a monument there. There's some old ruins, and this is just a few miles from me. There's what the ruins look like, I guess. Just like the pottery I was finding 2 miles from where I live, I found some pottery like that, and walls that are very similar to this, as you guys saw the other day. Very similar to this. So I believe this whole area, is where they live, but it's below the ground somewhere where the actual cave is, where they had the treasure. Now, the Zuni, Cibola County is where I'm at. This is Cibola County, and this is the Zuni Reservation. And so right here on this, where it says 36, Highway 36, which is like where I went and I found those ruins. I live here. This is this Candy Kitchen, and you go across the road, and right there is where those ruins are. This is where I found the ruins. This is the Indian Ruins Road. And that's where we were looking the other day. You go back about 2 days ago, I made a video where I show these ruins. Now, I haven't explored the whole area, but just west of there, somewhere over in this area, I don't know exactly where it is, there's a monument of one of the 7 cities of gold that Cordova went to explore and couldn't find it because it's a cave. But it's right in here. So it's like, I don't know, 20 miles from me as the bird flies. And this is the area out here where I'm going to go camping and exploring. All of this is ruins. Now, that Chaco Canyon I was talking about, it's above, there's Chaco Canyon. And that's above Gallup. Well, actually above Thoreau or Grants. But it's only about 130 miles or something like that from me. So right here is where these 7 cities are. But this whole area, that's where the river ends. Somewhere in this area there was originally a big lake. And around the lake in this area were these 7 cities. And they've named my county after it. So we don't know. It could be anywhere in this area along this river there are the 7 cities, according to legend. Anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. I'm going to leave it there. Way over an hour. But, yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to go exploring this summer and stuff. So we'll see what we find. Well, guys, have a great evening. Lord will bless you. May His grace be with you guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.